Hi, and welcome to HippoBrain. Here we have hippo-sized conversations with people with hippo-sized brains. It's my pleasure to announce today that we're having a nice hippo-sized conversation with the HippoBrain, Nilesh Patel. Nilesh Patel is the co-founder and CEO of LeadSquared. I've had a privilege of interacting with him over the last few years and to see his company grow. Today, we'll try and get into this mind of this co-founder to understand the nuance of how a B2B SaaS firm works and how he is able to build out something that is truly global. Over to you, Rajesh.
Thanks a lot, Jaimit, and welcome to HippoBrain, Nilesh. It would be great to start the discussion with how you've been building LeadSquared. It's an amazing B2B SaaS company, great presence in India, now going global. Three of you as co-founders, as a team. So what's the sort of origin story? How did the idea come up? This is your second venture. How did you start and how has the journey been?
Hey, thank you, Rajesh and Jaimit, to invite me for this session. It is interesting to see, and some of the other videos I have seen of HippoBrains. I'm glad and privileged to be here with you all today. So first, I think I'll just quickly step back because you talked about the first. This is my second company with my co-founder colleague. So we started our first business in 2003. And I joined IBM in '99 out of college, met Sudhakar in IBM, and then we started the journey on Proteans. It was called software product development service. So and I'm sure you may have some recall of those early IT services days. Now we can call it early. At that time, it was really very, very hot. So there was. Literally, if you say IT services, there was no differentiation. So Sudhakar coined this terminology of OPD, outsourced product development, which was kind of a nice way to package the service of working with product companies or software vendors who are in Western countries. So that was the genesis. But it took us about a few years before we got to that keyword. It was probably 2005 is when it took 2 years. There was initial struggle in raising money and all that, little bit of raising money, and then those early days, right? I mean, we had raised some money from a venture fund when there was a fund called Kitwin, Karnataka IT Venture Fund. We raised a little money from them. And the business was started to grow then. Because if you look at, there is some similarity in SaaS and that business, and I'll sort of like to point it out because if you're an outsourced product development company, you basically have a dedicated pool of resources working for a customer. It's like a recurring billing, right? I mean, maybe in IT services, it was mostly project driven, like you bid for a project, you get a project for a price, and then you kind of do it. And that it was more, a pool of people, you're setting it up for a customer, and then there is a billing for that. But so that was the business we were in, and it was bought in 2010 by Symphony, which is now part of Samsung. But as a services entrepreneur, if you have spoken to other people, in that landscape, and there's always this itch of creating your own technology, that thing sort of always comes up. And after being in Symphony for about a year or so, we came out and started looking at what could be the opportunity, right? And SaaS, was a keyword, was not that big a keyword, which is now, but it was decently enough of a keyword. And I happened to travel and went to some conferences in 11 in US and saw this whole the Salesforce wave and the HubSpot and so many other marketing and sales technology companies and other side of the SaaS business as well. I was not very familiar with the other areas like infrastructure software and all that, but that has been again a very hot area there. So came back, and the idea was to figure out in the new business to do something on the intellectual property led business. So that was the crux of the idea. So when we started the business, we called it Market Expander, which was like it has to do something with expansion of the market, right? So that's the name of the company actually, Market Expander Services. So the idea was to, so basically help people, expand their markets, and that was the sort of crux. So Dakar came up with this word, and actually he had reserved this domain long back. I don't know when, but he had this thing, reserved on, GoDaddy or somewhere much earlier. So we started the business initially by offering some sort of a consulting and marketing and sales services, because in Proteans days, there's one thing which we learned was how to do inside sales driven customer acquisition, because we had little money to live in US, I mean, really early days. So with whatever thing we knew, now people use obviously sophisticated tools and email technology. And early days, I think MailChimp was probably the one, and I think Constant Contact was really emerging in those days. So that was the sort of the state of affairs then. And so we did email based lead generation, phone based lead generation. So in our in the landscape where people knew us, I mean, in the smaller IT services companies, there was obviously you have people whom like peers opening their own companies, and there were several people from Proteans who also went and started their own companies. So they also knew that these guys have done some. So when we started a company, they wanted to see what they can learn from us, and that also helped us sort of in the process of building that initial revenue and learnings of what to do basically, right? So that sort of fueled in the initial services revenue for us in the market expander time. And while we were sort of doing this, we're trying to figure out what would be the product idea will work in. So we were already zeroed in on the sales and marketing sort of landscape. And then we saw all this traction building, a lot of funding. Padot was getting bought, there's so many things were going on in the market then. So we figured this whole automation space is where we should be building. And that's how we started our product development work in, I think, late 2012, early 2013. Took us some time to really come up with the initial concept and launch the one thing we did was I started selling alpha only. Like, we didn't wait for what the product was. I mean, so we started selling the alpha itself, and found customers and gave the same product to our existing services customers then. And that's how we sort of started that sort of journey of LeadSquared initially. So that was sort of the initial piece for us. And then in 13, it was largely a miss. I mean, we were selling, people were using the product for a month and then went away. There was no renewal, and there was not much capital either, right? I mean, there was not much capital to do anything. So what we did was, in 12 end, somewhere towards 12 end, we raised probably about 1.5 crore from people like friends and people whom we worked with and people who knew us basically, right? And then we put about a somewhat similar capital from our side. I mean, that is very little to really build any product literally in today's. Even if in those days developers were never cheap, right? I mean, in 2012, 13 time frame. So we built that product and we started selling that time. So then in 14, I think we talked about as we were building the sales funnel. So let me kind of back up a quick moment, right? So in 13, we're trying to sell the product in US. We did spend some money on Google Ads and whatnot. We spent some money there, but there was not a great fit in what we're trying to do with what the customer was asking then, right? So the early success was there, but it was not enough to sort of push forward in that direction. So then what happened was there was sort of lucky thing for us, maybe in some sense, that we had some education customers in the beginning in 13 time frame, and they tend to like the platform for one reason or the other. I don't know. They just because it was a simpler platform, maybe, right? It was more suited for what their needs. And initial platform was more, I would if I sort of go back and call it more like a marketing platform then, right? But the fact that we were all, our head was all in sales, right, in the beginning. So there were those sales elements somehow came into the product, right? That this should be there and that should be there, and that kind of crept in. And so that sort of, that was the sort of first leg, if I would call, in the initiation of the concept of the business, that it has to be intellectual property led, and and that was sort of the first sort of thought process, how we sort of came forward with this idea.
So it's interesting how you managed. One of the things is, how did you started focusing on managing the sales force, and the focus that you have around your product and the promise that you have. I have seen you over a period of time hold that very tight. How did you come across that I want to solve this problem? And how is it that you're able to always hold it tight? Because I think there are always forces on a product that force it in all different directions.
So I think so it has been a good, first thing is there was a lack of availability of capital, because ideas are many, right? You have to do many things. So the idea was to first sell and see whatever you sell, right? So first is to make sure there is enough, what you're creating allows you to go and position the product, and that was the theme running from in the beginning itself. And because of lack of capital, you could only prioritize so much, right? Also lack of capital, and whatever the available developer bandwidth or the engineering bandwidth you have, you can only do sort of so much and solve the problem as much. So we solve the problems when they come. So there is a concept, customers using the product. So for example, let's say if there is no problem of scale, why do you want to solve it, right? I mean, and we obviously had our early misses in doing things which we shouldn't be doing. But so for example, if the customer is only sending 10,000 emails, or working with only 15 users, why do you want to solve and scale it for 10 billion emails or whatever, like a large number? It doesn't make sense. So that was the available capital, and sort of looking at the customer set we are going after. And also maybe just consciously, maybe you can say that, or just by luck, I would say, in some sense, that the sales process we had, I sort of knew that this product where will they find a buyer? And I could have been wrong. Look, I mean, if I've gone after larger enterprises in beginning, maybe this would have been a different story, right? But the fact that in a lot of smaller to mid-size customers in the very early days, they were willing to pay for it. And I think getting into large enterprises, now we work with a lot, it's difficult to get in, and to reach a point where you can get your invoices paid. I mean, there is a long cycle, but that is not true for a small to mid-sized businesses. So there you can, and so the cash kept coming in, so you sell, you're able to, and so the problems which came in, and a lot of small to mid-sized businesses, if you see, there's a lot of lack of love for them, right, in the market, right? I mean, so if you just do right service for them, they will be happy to pay and be your customers. I mean, I still have customers from 2013, good customers, at the same revenue level maybe, but they've been using our product for 6-7 years now. So even the product has evolved, whatever, but they kept paying. So I think that was one thing. But coming to the point, right? So we solved the problem as they come in, and really focused on that. And all the credit goes to Sudhakar, who's my co-founder colleague, in really looking at horizon of problems, because we have this interesting setup in the company that whenever a salesperson comes in with a problem, he knocks the door of the product, right? And probably it happens in most companies, but it is here salespeople don't come and complain me. They will just go and tell the product team, and they keep making notes, right? I mean, and then we used to do this little meetings, like monthly sort of prioritization meetings, whatever. But really, Sudhakar had that whole thing sorted out even today, right? That what is really needed. If he knew that a deal can be closed, and he knew that by doing this, I would not break the product, or this is not only for this customer, right? I mean, I think that was really and that continues to be the case, right? Whatever we make, it is not for one customer, and that is obviously a rule of SaaS. And whenever we have made that mistake, we have actually we have to really we paid for it. I mean, basically, it was not worth taking that mistake. So I think that tightness still is there, and progressively, over from 13 forward, I think there were also instances and times when there was this thinking in the mind of the entrepreneur and our team, right? That should we go down the marketing path or should we go down the sales path, because the product was getting bought for a little of both in really early days. But the 2014 actually changed it, because in 14, 13 was very early. The product was really very very early, right? 14 we signed up an education company in Mumbai, and there was the first 100 user deal. And I think that was the first instance of really saying, look, this is the path. And because product was simple, and people were able to use it, and I think after that we kept on working on the sales piece from that point onwards, and that was sort of the evolution of the product, and how we sort of made our choices basically, and still we make the same way.
So initially, Nilesh, the sort of product market fit came from Indian customers.
Yes.
So largely companies in India with a largish maybe sales force that they had, and where you're working to partly automate the sales process, etc. So that your initial success came in from a set of companies. Like education, you mentioned, was one of the early verticals.
Correct.
So that's how you discovered the product market fit.
Right. So initially, we never went after the large ones. So I think that was the difference because somehow I knew, or maybe I could be wrong, right? I mean, you can always take the clock back and see whether that was the right choice or not. But the SMB used to pay quickly. So I think that, because there was a very little money to really survive and thrive. So I think that was one. And second, initially the sales piece. In education, you could sell a product on phone those days also, and which means you could have a nice because anybody who was generating inbound leads would need a little bit of 15-20 member team, whatever they are. So that was the initial target market, right? And then it started from people with a 15-20 member team to, let's say, multi-center operations, right, which have multiple teams. And then that was the also early days of edtech evolution, right? So then the larger players started. So then the second big moment, for us was when we got Byju's as a customer, right, in 2014, and I think that sort of changed the some of the part of our trajectory of our business as well. But that was the sort of the product market fit piece was getting to one type of customer, and then just then the DNA. Look, the salespeople are also sort of inclined towards wherever they're able to find an audience, right? So somehow that the company's sales DNA became that go to an education customer and they will buy, and obviously they wanted to make wins, and that's what they went after. And so that was the initial sort of the initial discovery of the product market fit and initial story making. Even though if I would have to tell somebody that first of all, there was not much recognition of B2C and high velocity sales as a category in itself, and because if you look at any sales tools, largely most of the sales tools, they are all B2B originated, because you find a lot of salespeople in B2B, but India has a different set of problems, right? I mean, we have large sales teams, and so recognition of that came later, and there are still people who don't believe it, so that's a different different thing. But that was the initial sort of the product market fit and validation. Like, look, there's the concept of leads coming in. The sales process has to be faster, tighter, so that you can close it quickly. So that sort of happened in the first few years.
So it's interesting. What you're saying is, I'm taking a leaf out of there, and I've often heard you say this. You're designing for not the B2B sales force. While I'm sure your product can be used, you're designing for the B2C sales force, and different nuances come into play. So can you explain a little bit on how this works, and what are a few examples on why should it matter? It's finally a sales guy, no?
Right. So, see, look, I mean, I think the more in technology, the more entities you have, right, the complex it becomes. Meaning, if you look at a classic any enterprise product, if multiple entities are there, and the more you have, the product making gets difficult, and also the sorting for the user gets difficult, right? Meaning where to go and solve it. So if you look at a classic B2B product, that is a problem for the reps, right? But also more importantly, if you see the people who are in classic B2C sales process, they for a for a lack of a better word, I mean, they are not as educated in terms of where they are, and versus a classic B2B guy selling a higher ticket item, right? That very different user persona. So making a product which is simpler for the in the context of the user was very, very important, and that simplicity drives the user user to use the product. A lot of sales related CRM and other projects actually fail because you try to do too many things, number one. Number two, the the scale in B2C businesses also is different, and we discovered over as we built our product from 14 till now, the volumes are different, the use case complexity is different, right? And so sort of accommodate all of that and still operate at scale is not something which you can do in the classic other products. And we just happened to discover this. I mean, because if you look at most other products, they start with that that infrastructure, that complexity right in the beginning, and that removes the simplicity out of it. And what you needed for a certain type of user persona is the rather simplicity. And I have to accept with all with all humility that we can still do a better job on our product, right? I mean, so not to say that we have the we have done we're like super solid there, but the point is that whatever we have been able to do is to sort of simplify the life for the user on the front end. Also, I have I have a firm belief that in sales, right? I mean, obviously the rep on the front end is the one who's driving the sales, right? But managers have a very important role to play. And I think if you have very solid managers running the sales teams in whichever units, teams, how they are divided, and so they are the key drivers for any sales process, right? So making it effective for managers is also an important component of how you can drive the sales, right? So a sales manager in a B2C operate in a certain way, right? I mean, so that sort of building those and understanding the nuances of that was also extremely important for us, and that's what sort of came into the product.
Any examples that you can bring about that the products are slightly different?
Yeah, so I won't name any product on which we are different, but if you look at any, so for example, the way if you look at a classic CRM product, right, and I sort of define it in the following way, that the user who is operating, who's working in the software, right, they have to find the work, meaning you go in, you search what you have to do, and then you go ahead and do it. And while you complete the work, you will have multiple places you have to go and check the box, or add a note, or maybe other parts of the process. And that flow can be at multiple screens in multiple entities, right? That's the classic flow in most of the products out there. Now, what you need is you need to change that, because of the user persona is not, let's say, that driven or educated. You want to basically say, look, I will present the work to you. I'll take this analogy a lot, that there were days when we used to go and find the food, right? And then now food comes to us, right? Similarly, the work has to be presented to someone, and then we also figured that the work has to be slotted, meaning it's like a workbench, right? If there's another analogy I use, like if you look at a carpenter's table, right? It's like it's called workbench, right? Meaning all tools are there, whatever they have to do, they just do it there, and their efficiency is function of accessing stuff which is close to them. So presenting the work there was the first, is one of the important things. And then making the execution of work, meaning completion of work in a fashion where they're unlikely to make a mistake. Meaning you drive them to complete the work in say A, B and C steps, right? And those could be different for different businesses. So which is where you have to give that flexibility to the user to say, look, first I'm going to help you present the work, and then I'm going to give you a system to complete the work in an outline fashion. Meaning, because if you give the power to the user to decide how they will complete the work, the cost of training goes up, and then errors creep into the system, right? So, and you imagine doing it at 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people rep force. I mean, then it's just is when people go and say, I want to build my own application, basically, right? And so I think how do you sort of solve the problem for the user? And this is one of the ways to sort of, so thinking it in this fashion is not something which is because CRM has never thought this, right? I mean, it's like factory thinking, right? How you create in factory, how do you lay out the process, right? That, this happens and this happens. And so that is what you needed to break the work in. If you create the work like that, you basically move pieces faster. So that was the sort of a thinking which was there, underlying in the whole, and that's what was important from a B2C standpoint also, right? I mean, because it needs to work like a factory, right? The work comes in, it is acted on, and then, I mean, it's like this, right? I mean, factory also, when things come in, the wastage goes up, right? If you don't do it properly, isn't it? Like, I mean, that terminology, I'm not like super familiar with the terminology, but the wastage goes up, meaning leads is the material, raw material, right? You act upon it in a certain way. If you don't act upon it, and then the wastage sort of goes up, and then you're basically making not making enough money from the same raw material.
So, Nilesh, if you just dig a little deeper into this, how do you make the decision of basically what not to do? Typically, what happens in products is that as you're developing, there's all these requirements coming in from all different directions. And over time, the bloat also happens. So you want to add this feature, okay, add another feature there. So one of the big decisions is what not to do, which means you need to have a very good clarity on the use case you're solving and what your end customer is doing. How is that decision made?
So first is, on the prioritization, the sales efficiency is the crux of what we want to drive for our customers, right? Meaning that's an area we want to differentiate and offer a different, value to the customer than the classic generic products. So I think that's the core of what we do. Now, when you're creating the product, there are things which may not directly attribute to sales efficiency, but are platform choices, right? So you make those platform choices, you have to make some of those choices, and some of those could be long term. So Sudhakar does this beautifully. He's my co-founder colleague. I mean, the idea is that all the feedback comes in. So the salespeople, generate tons of feedback. But the point is, when the decision is being made on what to do, right? I think 2 or 3 things are important, and some of these things we have sort of learned later. So I won't say that we knew all of that in 2014-15, honestly. But one is to how to, is basically these, if this is going to impact the sales process. So one is, if I do this new feature, let's say, right, does it align to my sales process, sales efficiency use cases? Because LeadSquared focuses on the sales side. So if, let's say, there's a lacuna, there is some things missing in the product, but that doesn't align to sales efficiency, then the priority will be given to the element which is on the sales efficiency side. That's the one key driver. Second is also important to see the market focus, right? So I've come to this thinking, and is that you don't hunt. So you have people who hunt customers, and then you have people who hunt markets, right? So if you're hunting a market, right, then you have to create and prepare for the market. And for example, if you go or sell into enterprises, right? So even though sales efficiency is the end objective, but the security and other concerns of an enterprise, the regulatory concerns, so those are your base, right? Without that base, you cannot enter those companies. So if you may win a few customers by going into and talking them out, right? Maybe the smaller end of the customer in that space. But eventually, if you have to be a player in that market, you have to solve those problems. So those are the things which are more market need driven, like which has to be there, has to be built. Number one. Then sales efficiency is the second piece. And then the third is the customer attrition, right? If you lose customers and you're losing customers for a certain reason, then then you plug that gap. Again, it has to be aligned to sales efficiency, right? If let's say, somebody sold a deal, just to, some email credits and got the customer in. I mean, that customer was never going to use LeadSquared for, let's say, sales purpose, right? So then we would not prioritize their asks in the product, at all. So I think the crux is sales efficiency, A, and B, the market, right? See, market, because if you look at the sales so we call it sales right now, but if you go to a university, right, they don't call it sales, they call it admissions, right? So different businesses call it differently. Like in lending, maybe they'll call it something else. In different businesses, they will have a different terminology. So to see what that market needs is what then. So there could be some ingredients which are required. So for example, if document scanning is needed in a certain market, right, in certain market process, then that's without it you cannot even run the sales process. So that's like that is needed to do the process, and then you build on the sales efficiency theme. So what drives the sales process is one piece which has to be built, and some of those platform pieces gets built over time. And then the crux is if I have to summarize, crux is sales efficiency, what sort of the key driver for our choices.
It's interesting what you're saying, and I know, after knowing you for a few years, this is something that you've always focused on, sales efficiency. And I've always asked you, why don't you do this? And you would always come back and say, no. If this helps my sales efficiency, my lead conversion, and if that's happening, I'm ready to build it. If it's anything outside of it, you could be a MarTech company for all I care, but that's not what you want, and this is how you're coming.
Yeah.
It's also interesting that I'm just trying to change tracks a little bit. I've met both your co-founders in that sense. I see within all three of you a very similar line, a very strong aggression at the undercurrent level, but on the top of it, you're extremely shant, quiet, nice people to talk to, very, very polite to a fault, but the aggression comes out. So I think when I speak to you in sales, sometimes the aggression comes out. When I see Sudhakar, it comes out. When I meet Prashant, I realize there is an aggression and a streak to it. You are a 3-people firm. How does this work?
So I think we started together in Proteans days, right? So we knew each other, and we now know more about each other, obviously, than we knew when we started. But there is a unique, there's a unique blend in how we operate together. And maybe it is all because of the middle class roots all of us went through, or maybe all of our engineers or whatever. But I think there is a huge complementarity in how we work. And I think at the base of it, all of us are probably salespeople, all three of us, right, in some sense. So I think that's probably I won't use the word aggression, but that's sort of the crux of it, I think. So that's has sort of put us together in the context. Prashant has its unique abilities to sort of work with large customers, for example, right? I mean, he's very comfortable in that situation, for example, right? And driving the process very tightly. And Sudhakar has a great ability to I'm sure you have seen there are VP of products and VP of engineering. I mean, he's a rare mind, kind of putting the two together, right? I mean, because how to prioritize for engineering and how to prioritize for product is not something easy for people to sort of put that together. So I think that sort of comes in. But literally, the underlying is customer obsession. I mean, I think all three of us are very, very passionate about it. And look, you have no other choice if you're not able to raise a lot of money. Some of that also is a result of that. That you have to really hang on to what you have tightly, right? You cannot just let it go in any case. And whatever opportunity comes in, we just sort of grab it like a child, like thinking we should have it, right? And I think that So the entire sales thinking runs across three of us, probably unites us in some manner and binds us together.
That's interesting how you guys are running it together. Again, just quickly switching tracks back to running the firm, etc. Um, you've been, I think, conservative in raising capital. You've managed to take some of the strategic rounds, etc. And it is many times I've spoken to you. It's about a question about you trying to be at some point profitable in whatever you do. Um, in such a scenario, when you want to grab more market share and you want to do it, and I've never understood this if you can help me in a B2B SaaS system, how do you price? How do you understand what is it to price the consumer? Because probably from a very, very outside in perspective, each extra customer probably costs nothing to service, as I see it. But I would love you to shed some light on how do you figure out what is the pricing?
Pricing, I'm still figuring it out, to be honestly. I think because the right pricing is very hard to get, right? Because especially when we traverse the path from being a small firm to small as in serving a small to mid-sized customer to where now we're serving to enterprise customers, right? So, but you have to make it easy for customers to buy. I mean, that much is obvious. And some of the unfortunate reality is that, or that the customers have already made up their mind in how they buy a certain category of products, right? So there is no point in fighting that choice algorithm, whatever the choice architecture the customer has in buying. So we have to align with that. So that was so if you look at the user-based pricing, I think, is the center of how the product is priced. But what has also happened is, so that's, I mean, that's the crux of the pricing. But when you look at the volume of it, right, in some of the things we serve and the way our platform has evolved, we've been offered multiple opportunities to price the product and additional product features in an incremental way, right? So there are things, and people are willing to pay for it, right? I mean, so those things. So, for example, there is a developer platform, so there's a price for that. There is some sort of a customer experience piece of it. There's how people sort of people pay for that basically, separately. So product pricing, we stuck to, I would say, rather the classical logic, but wherever we deviated, where we, when we saw that the customers were latching on a feature, right, and they started using it more and more, we figured what is the value under what they're deriving out of it. And then we went back to the customers and looked at and said, look, this is not, this is not a user-based pricing, right? I mean, you're consuming this service more, and it offers a different value to you than what you actually bought the product for. So can you kindly, relook at this and pay for it? So obviously some customers, would agree and see the value, and then we will figure it out for the next, set of customers. That becomes a standard, pricing. So, and I think this whole marketplace model is also getting more and more common. I mean, Salesforce obviously has, led that market and all. But if you're building an additional products around LeadSquared, right? How you can price that incremental service. So, for example, today this whole Zoom connector, is very popular, right? I mean, so we build this piece together. So then now people are willing to pay incremental for that, for example, because it's an add-on service. So I think from a pricing standpoint, that's how we would look at the value to the customer. And look, you cannot price everything. I mean, then it becomes messy beyond a point. The customer, you have to simplify it. So wherever you can push, you should. But the choice architecture cannot be changed for the customer fundamentally, right? I mean, it has to be developed, over time. So you've got to sort of fit in. There's no point in fighting that battle. I mean, it just goes nowhere in general.
Nilesh, one thing I wanted to take up is your journey as a company. You started with customers in India. And now you've been targeting US customers, basically going global. So how has that sort of transition been? I'm assuming India still is an important market
Yes.
for you. But now the next sort of growth element comes from competing with the big guys outside of India. So how do you sort of go global? I think there are a lot of Indian SaaS companies now. SaaS is a big area of for new entrepreneurs in India. So how does a company like yours with a foundation in India, how do you sort of take it to the US and other countries?
So great question, and the honest answer is I'm working on it. But I'll tell you what has happened. Sort of. So first is India. Obviously, we were able to achieve a scale, and then started looking outside. I mean, that was the first thing. So looking outside, outside India was always of interest, but you cannot do it, just by at multiple places. So I had my own hits and misses when we started looking outside. So we said US was always on my mind. I mean, and still is, and we're working on that, and we've made good progress there. So when I look at outside, I'm going to talk about some of those little horror stories as well. So we looked at Southeast Asia. We wanted to say, okay, let's go to. So we made a mistake by going into the market without being prepared, right? I mean, so if you go to Vietnam, for example, right, and you don't have a product in Vietnamese, I mean, it doesn't help, right? You can start selling, and people will keep listening, and nobody's going to make a purchase decision, right? And so so that was one. Obviously, people, looking back, it is obvious. Like, why would you go to a country with a different language and not have a product ready? But my thinking was a bit different. I said, let me go there and find out what is that they actually need. If I create a product in advance, so why don't we just go and sell something, and then we'll see how to serve that, right? I think that need when and also if you look at from a B2C context, I mean, we have to sell where a lot of people are there, right? I mean, because that's where the B2C business will be large and can be large businesses. So that was the idea. So we went there, but I think my learning in operating in Southeast now and is that the route is with partners, right? I mean, if you can find the partners whom you can align with, I think that is the way to go in some of these countries, right? Or rather, all of these countries largely. But to get to the first few customers, it doesn't matter, right? You partner or direct, because what will not be right thing to do is you don't have a product for that market, right? I mean, I think so. Getting the product for the market is important, and then the channel to go to the customer is important. So any which can come first, but channel usually will come later. But you have to go there, talk to people. There will be a partner who will be as entrepreneurial as you are, and he will have 5 customers, his good friends. He will say, look, I'm going to take my reputation on the line and position this product because I see a potential in this product in future. So that there were some misses there, but now our entire strategy is to really pick a few countries and build good partnerships and sell there. The same. So what I did was I tried 3 things together. Very sort of. I said we'll go to Southeast. We have a person working in that. Then I said we'll go to the Middle East and we'll go to Africa, like South Africa and other places. And US we were doing on phone. And I said, look, we'll fail in some areas, which is okay. So we went to there was a gentleman who worked in South Africa. He was traveling 6-7 times in 18 months. So we signed few partners, we signed few customers, and then look what happened. We found a partner, very good partner, who is now sort of our LeadSquared South Africa, for example, right? So now we have struck a very good partnership. Now they would predominantly be running the sales and service, and our job will be to maintain the product and run the infrastructure, right? And obviously we have to teach them how to keep selling. So I think that is one interesting thing, and I'll talk about that later. And I'm very passionate about that part. So basically that again is a partnership, right? In Middle East also we have partners, and so that was the sort of a go-to market strategy. And what I also believe is for future companies, right? If this template is created, right, just like how IT services created template to sell in US, right? I think once this template gets created, a lot of companies will be able to scale faster because there will be footprints on where to walk, right? I mean, in some of these economies, and is what sort of we tried, and now we have certain degree of success coming from each of these markets. In US that was an interesting one for us. Even though I had an experience in working in US, what was the initial learning for was to, so India is a certain type of market, right? Our product sells in 4 categories, 5 categories in India. In US, our interest was to find initially which category we should go after, because anyway which you look at it, there'll be some nuances to a market which you have to cater. Even though we always created the product, keeping in mind the global audience, meaning because you cannot you have to build, if you have to build a large company, you have to think global. So education was our template, right? We did extremely well in Indian education, so we looked at US education as a market, and we kept on working on that market till we found a segment, because education itself is very large in US, right? I mean, it's itself is about more than $8 to $10 billion in consumption, software consumption every year. So that is a large market. So in that, where do you, sort of go? Which use case would you, make solve? And so that was the approach we took. So we took a segment, and then we further said, okay, let me further, can I dissect it further and see this is where I have a better fit, and the product offering really matches. And in US, the other big problem you will face is there are no green markets available, right? I mean, there are no open markets literally. So it is a replacement sale. And so driving a replacement sale is a tough, usually a tough sale. But the good thing is that the customer there is, much more, advanced than most of the other customers out there, right? So they're willing to make a switch. Otherwise it's very hard to make a customer switch from existing platform. So that took us about good 18 months to figure that piece out, and that required us to be there. We were in those conferences, those events where these customers were there, to build those personal relationships with people, right? And then once they saw us enough, when you see the same face like 3 times, you kind of know them, right? So when they saw us in all these 3-4 events, conferences, our booth was there, and then we got some initial customers. We built, I talked about partnerships. So we also built, partnership, because, certain type of companies operate in a certain segments only, right? So let's say there's a marketing company operating in education, they will largely serve education customers only. So if you build a relationship with them, there is a partnership which you can strike with them, and that helps you. So your name needs to be, heard in that segment, basically, right? So you may be unknown in any other segment, but if you're known in that segment, I think it helps you, somehow people feel that you are larger than what you are actually, or you're bigger than what you could be. And that was something which we tried. And I think it's a safer way to do it. I mean, less expensive rather, because going all horizontal, and maybe strategy is different for different companies. For us, this was probably the most, appropriate, or what I figured was the most appropriate strategy, given the frugal situation we have to be in. So that's what we sort of tried and did.
That's interesting. In terms of trying to get, what would I say, inch wide and mile deep.
Yes.
You get a beachhead and then go deep into the entire thing. So
one point I'd like to add. Look, I mean, in the business of sales efficiency, right? I mean, you have to really understand the minute, the elements of the sales process. So, segments operate differently, right? Not that, so they sell, and the buying and selling, the underlying is constant across globe, literally. But the point is that the steps may be different, meaning, how they make a purchase decision, the way they communicate, the way they interact. And so so learning of the process is important to be successful in this side. And so that way we have to be really getting enough customers in a category to be able to make the product, solid for that category, right? Because you're tying the loose ends, even the platform is ready, you got to make those correct integrations in place. if a certain, if the let's say if the admissions officer work in a certain way, right? How do you make sure that they're able to work in that way, right? So those learnings are there, and I think if you have a broad product, then I think you will lose that opportunity.
Yeah, that's always the problem, because when you suddenly have a large, broad range of services, the consumer is likely to get confused. What is it that I'm going to pick,
Correct.
and where do I try and put it in? That sense, if you are inch wide, you're able to, as you rightly said, show that you are far bigger than what you actually may be.
Correct. And also, when it's in the case of replacement sale, right? The buyer has to really understand why they are going to change it, right? And so the better you can enumerate the reasons why they should purchase from you, I think the better it gets for you to be able to put across your point and help them make their choice. And the first few are always hard, right? They're always difficult to get in. But once you sort of get past that, I think then things get, I won't say easier, but definitely not as tough as the first few ones.
Nilesh, one thing you had mentioned which you wanted to talk about was the South Africa example. How do you teach them how to keep selling?
Yes. So I think that's an area I think when I heard this somewhere, either one of the big personalities talked about it. I'm not sure if it was Bill Gates or someone, but I think it was said that in today's world, you have to outlearn the other guy. I mean, outlearn the other guy, meaning you have to out-educate, everybody else. So I think I feel rather, if I can make people learn how to sell LeadSquared and use LeadSquared, whether I may not have all the features, but if people only know this, they will probably use this and they'll buy this. So I think, which basically means that you really have to have that whole concept of educating people on how to sell a product, how to I would say sell, how to help the customer understand what is there in your product which helps them solve their problem. I mean, selling is obviously maybe a more cheesy way to say that you want to sell, but literally the customer has to be presented with a solution which they can see their problems getting solved. I mean, there's another little example I try to relate. Like whenever we buy a vacation package, right? You are never in that boat which they show you, right? It's always in your head, right? They show you this nice picture, this beach and this pool and all these nice laid out tables, and so that's what you actually buy. So when you're buying, you're buying, that look, this actually solves my problem. I can see how this solves my problem. And if you can educate enough people who are saying this on your behalf or along with you, I think you'll have more success than otherwise, basically. And so more people in my partner channel or anywhere in the world or other gets educated on saying the story, I think the success should follow after that.
So in a way, that really becomes the moat. So the one side, of course, is the product and the simplicity that you're talking about. But it's also how you're building the knowledge base in both the partner channel and the end customers about the product. Correct. The more you get there, it really limits the area or the space for a competitor to basically get in there.
Yes, I mean, I think the land grab can be faster, right? If more people, I think that's the distribution is a moat, not talked about as a moat, but actually it is a moat. I mean, if you have distribution done well, and it is hard. I mean, Microsoft had some 70,000-80,000 distributors in the world. Like, I mean, how can you compete with that? In certain product categories, it's just impossible. So distribution can become a moat, in certain business types. And I think this is one example that you can possibly create.
One sort of quick question, as you look back in your entrepreneurial journey, and it's sort of spanned almost 17, 18 years across both the businesses, what are the one or two sort of pivotal moments which sort of have shaped you? in your journey, which have been defining moments in your life?
I have to really think, because I'll just say what I remember, maybe, but I think the first was when we came out of IBM, and I joined IBM in '99. I think starting the first company was definitely uh, an important moment, because that change that you give EMI to banks, but there was like you get EMI from company and you're not getting it anymore. I think that was the first moment, because it's almost like a sudden loss of income. Not that there was nobody dependent on me at that time, so it was rather easier to sort of take that. But I think getting on your own, was important. And then second was, or rather connected, was the first sale we got. I still remember we sold in the past company a deal to a defense company in India through a partner, and we had to drive a project. It was an interesting project to bring up Linux on a 10 megahertz processor. So that was one, because that was the first, literally the first sales and delivery process I went through, on my own. And that was one, I think, if I have to say. The other was, the whole understanding of the US customer segment, and knowing about them. And that happened when I was in IBM. I went to Austin few times, more like as an engineer then, but later on as somebody who's seeking for business. I think that duration in Proteans was very important, right, in terms of learning, and it actually grew me as an individual, because middle class thinking, it's very hard to take out from people, but the world you changed, I would say, a lot after looking at how people look at things differently. There's more trust in that society in general. I think some of that influenced me. And then later on, I think, if you see, the whole transition from a services entrepreneur to a product entrepreneur actually is a difficult journey, if you ask me, because in services, you say it's like a yes man type of business, right? You do what is right for the customer, and you basically do it. But in product, first of all, it's like opposite, right? In services, it's more people business. In product, you have to first get it right. I think that mental transition is hard, actually. And some people are very natural at it. I'm sure there are different abilities, but it took some time to figure that out, and that was a journey for us as a collective, as a group, and me as an individual. This whole transition, because and now the other piece is, and again, it was not a pivotal moment, but understanding of it is what I would call as pivotal in my own head. And the whole idea of telling your story, right? I mean, I think, and it has taken me a time to figure it out, honestly, because unless you have a story, people are not able to buy it, meaning you're not able to tell it effectively. So I think that has been a huge learning, and mental learning, I would say, for me. And that happened in this business. I mean, in last 5-6 years, that has been important, sort of, if I remember correctly, these 3-4 things. And I think a couple of other points I just like to talk about. Sudhakar and Prashant, and they've been, I've always been blessed to have friends who can, sometimes you point a book to somebody, right? I mean, read this, and then you sort of, if you read it, you find it interesting. I don't know who advised me to look at Peter Drucker's management books, I think that was my MBA lesson, I would say. I think some very simple things, if you just keep that in your head, it just helps you sometimes decide in a certain way, right? And so how do you create your choice architecture in your head in terms of, I think that is another interesting moment in my life, because I go back to those books whenever is needed, right? Just read 3, 5, 4 pages, some or the other thought comes in. And I think that was again, for me, from a thinking, building the thinking of how to do things has been important, personally. And, people have told me, and I've never been a book seeker personally, but whatever comes our way, you just pick, from it. So.
Great, I think, Nilesh. It is absolutely lovely. Just one last question to wrap up this conversation. What is the one thing that you get totally frustrated by?
Losing a customer is not fun. And especially if you could have done something about it. I mean, so I think that is generally, and obviously it is for, it's easier to say this, but that is one. And second is when you're in a meeting and you could have said something but you don't remember at that moment, which could have not just to close a deal or something like that. I mean, it's just a point which was important, you could have sort of remembered then. I think that drives some degree of frustration later in one's head, because I think the words you say in those meetings, and these could be personal meetings, friend meetings, right, whatever, can sometimes bite you for a long time. So I think that frustrates, but what can you do about it? I mean, it just, that moment has passed, right? So not much can be done about it. But I think some of those things really drives deeper frustration rather than. So I'm not sure if that others feel as well, but I go through that.
I think it's been a fascinating conversation. I think you've said everything right. No scope for any frustration today. I think anyone who hears you, Nilesh, will take away a lot, especially for me, some of the points you said. I think the point on the focus on how to build the product right. I think the simplicity elements, the understanding of the customer. I think the choices that you all have made as a company on where to focus, the theme around sales efficiency, especially when one is always tempted to get into adjacent areas, and that laser-like focus that you've built around sales efficiency. I think the sort of triad of selling, if I can call it, and there is the personal element where the in-person sales in India, the partnership. I think that is a great takeaway. I think especially for companies in India as they look at going global, partnership could be a very useful model. And of course, in the US, through the phone, now, of course, there are multiple other methods. So the 3 Ps, in a way, to begin the sales process. And I think a couple of other points, the distribution as a moat, I think is very interesting. I think there's a lot probably to take away in there. I think how can you think about getting the distribution right and using that as a moat? Everyone thinks of product as the moat, but I think you brought a very interesting angle. And I think the way your team has worked together for what, 15 plus years, I think is a tribute to your, I think, friendship, your individual natures. It's very rare to see, I think, a team stay across 2 different ventures. I think fantastic story there.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Nilesh.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we've been poor, so it's easier to be together when you're you don't have a lot of money. But anyway, no, you're right. It's hard to see many people survive that long.
So, Jaimit,
poverty is a big unifier, Nilesh. Rich people make bad friends. Poor people make amazing partners.
True. That helps, I think.
So that, yeah, it's been interesting, Nilesh, having a conversation with you. I think I've always seen you come across very polite, but there is such a beautiful undertone of aggression. And many times when I think about, like, is that something that I want to emulate, Nilesh? That's something that I really sometimes feel, that how you sell and how you push, and it comes through also over here. It comes through in the frustration that you said you show. You're on the face very nice and very sweet, but there is such a beautiful undertone to it. Whatever what Rajesh said is very interesting in terms of distribution is a moat. It's often unsaid, and the way you sell is a moat. It's often unsaid. But I think two other things that I love to take away, I like to take away tiny things out of it. One, the way you've looked at it as an assembly line in many ways. You're saying that every sales worker, his efficiency is paramount, and his time and the leads are raw material that he works with. And when you look at these two things as uh, the most important things that a firm probably brings in its sales process, and if you make it extremely sharp and narrow, the results are there to see, and that's what you've tried to bring into the product. And I think that's very interesting. That's something that I'm going to think through far more, and of course outlearn the other guy.
Yeah, I don't have to. I'll look around on the internet and find out who said that, because it was somebody. Either it was a podcast somewhere or somewhere else. But I think the only way to compete is outlearn. I mean, is what was told, and I mean there is logic to it. I'm sure people can compete in many other ways, but learning fast will not. You certainly will not be the last one. I mean, if you learn fast, may not be always the first one, but you'll certainly be there. I mean.
Yeah. There's no doubt about it. I think today, whatever businesses that we guys are in an individual capacity are running, the knowledge for this came in the last 4-5 years. I mean, I don't think, of course, there is experience built over 20 years, etc. But the knowledge is consistently changing. What we have to look at is consistently changing. And only one thing, if you're able to learn faster and you're able to outlearn some of the others, it's going to come in. And I'm going to use that as a product pitch or my sales pitch, saying that if you have to outlearn somebody, keep listening to hippobrain.com. You will get hippobrain.com on the website as well as on YouTube or wherever you're going to get your podcasts. It's all there. We hope to create a bank of such beautiful hippo-sized conversations with hippo-sized brains. Thank you for listening to us, and thank you, Rajesh, and thank you, Nilesh. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, Jaimit. Thank you, Rajesh, for having me.
Thank you, Nilesh.